Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of Smart Coach India, and in this episode we will be talking about the various settlement policies that were instituted by the British in their effort at collecting revenues in India. Alright, so the settlements, we already know their names, I presume. Those were the Zamindari settlement, Raiyatwari settlement, and finally the Mahalwari settlement. And remember, these settlement policies form very important chapters in the history of the British occupation of India, or the British administration of India. And we have already been acquainted with these names because these are part of our history and legacy of revenue settlement in India, alright. And these settlements in various forms and certain aspects of these settlements in various forms persisted in India and still persists in India to varying degrees, alright. And as far as the importance, or as far as the various facets associated with these settlement policies, the clue is in the name itself. Okay, the clue is in the name itself. So the Zamindari settlement, named after the Zamindars with whom the settlement was conducted, the clue is in the name itself. So if somebody asks you with whom was land proprietary rights settled through the Zamindari settlement, all right. So you can already from the name itself you can extrapolate the idea that it was settled, the land property rights were settled with the Zamindars. Then we come to the Raiyatwari. Who were the Raiyats? The Raiyats were the the Raiyats were the peasants and the tenants, all right. So Raiyatwari settlement is of course settled with the peasantry directly, okay, and individual peasants and individual landowners directly. And as far as Mahal is concerned, Mahal, the word Mahal comes from the word Mahal, right? Mahalwari comes from the word Mahal, and Mahal itself will mean estate. Okay. So those of us who are staying in Assam, we know that Hati Mahal will refer to an elephant estate. Okay. So these are estates, all right. So Mahalwari settlement dealt with estates, and proprietary rights were settled in such a way that entire estates were taken as single properties, and the proprietary rights to these estates were given to the individual peasants collectively, however, not singly, not individually, but proprietary rights were given collectively, and the responsibility to pay revenues also came collectively, okay, not individually but collectively. So let us now look into the histories of these various revenue settlements, okay. As far as number 1, number 2 and number 3, let me number them. Let us now look into the Zamindari settlement, that is number 1 in our list, okay. The Zamindari settlement is also known as permanent settlement, all right. And why is it known as the permanent settlement? It is known as permanent settlement because the rights to propriety were permanently settled. Proprietary rights, the rights to property, were permanently settled. With whom? With the Zamindars, as the name itself suggests, okay. And this was the brainchild, or how we can call it, an institution which was created by Lord Cornwallis, okay. This name is of great importance when we are talking about the permanent settlement. He was the Governor General of Bengal, okay, the Governor General of Bengal at that point of time. And we should also understand the fact that the permanent settlement was an idea which came from British common law, and it came out of a misunderstanding that India does not have proprietary rights, or India does not have well defined proprietary rights. However, this is not true. Well defined proprietary rights were in place even during the period of the Mughals, all right. However, these proprietary rights were layered. So these layers start right from the individual peasant who was the owner of the land, then it goes up to the Zamindar, and then it goes up the ladder up until it reaches the Badshah himself, or the ruler himself, starting from the peasant, Zamindar, then the local ruler, the governors, and then the Badshah. So everybody shared on the proprietary rights and the rights to revenues from this land. However, with British common law and the understanding that proprietary rights should be settled permanently and in the hands of a single individual owner, this kind of understanding of proprietary rights came into effect with the starting of the permanent settlement. And in fact, the British were under the illusion that they were creating the idea of property for the first time in India, all right. And you see, this kind of ideation or this kind of an argument has been put forward by Ranajit Guha in his book, you see, on the permanent settlement of Bengal, known as his book is named Rule of Property in Bengal. I highly recommend that book. If you are interested in history, you can read that book. It is a very highly recommended book, and it is very lucidly written, and you would get an idea of the British understanding of India and the British mental structure or the British ideological structure, which came to be which came into effect once they gained the rights to the revenues of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. Okay, so the permanent settlement, as we know, came into effect after the British gained the right to the revenue administration of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. They have gained the revenue administrative rights of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa after the Battle of Buxar. However, the permanent settlement is the mechanism through which the revenues will be now collected, all right. They have to put in effect a revenue collection system, okay, and the permanent settlement is the system through which revenue will now be collected from the areas of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, all right. So we have already talked about the name of Lord Cornwallis, who instituted the permanent settlement in Bengal. However, another name that is associated with the permanent settlement is John Shore, okay, who at that point of time was the chairman of the Department of Revenues, okay, who at that point of time was overseeing the Department of Revenues, all right. And it is said that Lord Cornwallis and John Shore, they were at loggerheads with each other as far as the various mechanisms of the permanent settlement, and the idea of permanent settlement itself is you see concerned, all right. So John Shore did not want to go with the permanent settlement. However, with Lord Cornwallis insisting that the permanent settlement will be the system through which revenue will be collected, you see, John Shore also goes along with the system that is put in place during the reign of Lord Cornwallis as Governor General of Bengal, all right. So let us look at the various facets of permanent settlement. We already know that it was settled, land propriety rights were given to zamindars, all right, and the zamindars now fully and completely own the lands with whom own the lands that had been settled with them, okay. So a zamindar will be given a particular piece of land and he will be asked to pay a revenue for this particular piece of land, all right, a permanent revenue, a revenue which will be settled permanently, that is, it cannot be raised or it cannot be lowered, and the zamindars are required to pay this revenue timely, all right, and regularly. Timely and regularly they have to pay this revenue, and the revenue was fixed at the maximum limit, all right. Why was it fixed at the maximum limit that can be obtained from this particular piece of land? Suppose you were given a piece of land as a zamindar, and the revenue that will be accruing to the state from that piece of land will be the maximum limit, okay. It will be the maximum amount that can be fairly taken by the state. Why was it done so? Because of the feature of permanency, because revenue cannot be raised, revenue cannot be lowered, and therefore the state has to maintain that the maximum amount of revenue that can come from a particular piece of land will be the revenue that will be fixed with you, okay. Therefore maximum revenue is permanent and it will be maximum, and the zamindars are required to pay it timely, okay. And you see, there cannot be lapse in the payment of the zamindari revenue that is accruing to the state. If there is a lapse, then the estate itself will lapse, okay, and the zamindar's rights over the land itself will lapse, okay, and the estate can be auctioned off. The estate can be taken over from the zamindar by the state and it can be auctioned off. In fact, it is said that the revenue was so atrociously high that most of the zamindars in Bengal lost their rights to the land, and most of the zamindars in this huge area where this permanent settlement came into effect, you see, they found themselves displaced from their own estate, and there was an infiltration of new social classes, okay, new social classes in the you see zamindari lands, all right. Once the lands get auctioned off, when the zamindar defaults, it is obviously bought off by urban classes, people of a newly emerging urban class who newly emerging class of people who have gained from the British administration in India, people like traders, people like moneylenders, all right. So these people come into the rural hinterlands and they buy up the estates which have been auctioned off, and this creates all sorts of social upheavals because the zamindars had been traditionally, you see, settled in these areas. They know the people, they understand the inklings of the people, they understand the various motivations of people. In fact, it is said that in vast areas, zamindars were also tied to the people that they were ruling, or sorry, not ruling, but to the people that they were leasing out their lands. They were also tied to these people through kinship and through communal, you see, belongings and kinship and communal ties. Okay, so therefore, with the infiltration of these new classes, you see, a social upheaval takes place. Okay, society gets redefined in a new manner. All right, and you see, these new people, of course, because they are from the urban areas and because they are from other classes, they don't share the same kind of understanding with the tenants with whom they are working in close, you see, quarters. All right, and therefore we see social classes, you see, arising out of this kind of a settlement system. Another very grave defect of the zamindari system is the fact that tenancy rights were overlooked. By this, what we mean is that although the relationship between the state and the zamindar were, you see, permanently fixed, however, the tenancy rights, all right, the rights of the tenants, what kind of rights do they have over the land that they are tilling with, okay, and what kind of revenues will the tenants pay to the zamindars, this was not fixed at all. Okay, and the zamindar was liable to fix the tenancy rights. The zamindar was liable to collect the revenue as per his it pleases him. Okay, as per it pleases the zamindar. So this created a great situation of over renting. Okay, sorry, rack renting, and this created a situation in which the tenancies, okay, or the tenants were, or the peasants were, you see, exploited to the maximum. See, the fact that the zamindari settlement was, you see, fixed at the maximum made it you see, made it pertinent upon the zamindars that the maximum amount of rent that can be acquired from a peasant will be levied, because the zamindars themselves have to pay the maximum amount of rent that can be paid from their particular estates to the state, and therefore the peasants came to be the oppressed ones in this entire setup. Okay, the peasants were supposed to pay quite heavy rents. And another feature of the zamindari settlement is the fact that there was absentee landlordism. And by absentee landlordism, what we mean is that these new social classes which are coming into the zamindari lands, they don't share any kind of proclivity, close proximity with the people that they are ruling over, with the people that they are collecting the revenues from. And these people don't really stay in the villages or don't really stay in the rural hinterlands where they own their lands. All right, they stay outside, they stay in the urban centers. All right, and what it means for the land that they own, this has certain implications upon the land that they own. You see, if you want to improve upon land, if you want to, you see, maximize the productivity of the land that you are holding, you have to be present in order to know the situation on the ground, all right? And these people who are not in the present at ground zero, they don't really know how to improve upon land. If a land needs irrigation, if it needs, you say, fencing, if it needs some kind of new innovative improvement in order to raise its productivity, these kind of ideas, it really does not come into effect when absentee landlordism starts. All right, and remember a very important point which Cornwallis made is that zamindari system is a system which will also have in it the idea, or which will also include in it the idea of improvement upon land, because he said that once we fixed the maximum limit as the limit which should be, as the amount which should be paid to the state, the zamindars would automatically want to improve upon the land so that they could, you see, retain more wealth. All right, so once you pay out the maximum levels of rent that you can pay, you would already want to improve upon the land that you have so that you have something for yourself too after paying the rent. However, with absentee landlordism, this kind of situation does not arise. People don't really know what to do with the land, okay. And at the same time, you see, in order to maximize their own profits, all right, they are not improving land, they are rack renting, they are exploiting the peasantry, okay, they are sublenting out the land, all right. So a peasant will sublend out, a zamindar would sublend out his own land to a zamindar who is present in the ground, all right. And that zamindar, in order to have some kind of profit, he will again, you see, rent it out to peasants, and the peasants again will be come to be oppressed, all right. So there are layers of, you see, a feudal system which are coming up at this point of time. One zamindar lending his land out to another zamindar who would be farming the revenue out of the land, and he also wants some profit, and therefore there will be oppression of the peasantry. So this was a huge circle of evil that came into effect with the start of the permanent settlement, and in fact the various settlement policies, including the permanent settlement, becomes one of the very important economic and social reasons why the rebellion of 1857 takes place later on, okay. Because of these social evils and the economic evils which British rule perpetrates upon India, because of that there is a rise of, you see, social, you see, ferment among the Indians, among the natives of this land against the alien rule of the British. So you see, these are the various features of the zamindari settlement. Now let us proceed into number 2, and number 2 will be the Raiyatwari settlement. The Raiyatwari settlement deals with the southern territories of Britain, okay, the southern territories. And by southern territories we mean the southern provinces, including the Madras province and the Bombay province also, which includes Sindh, by the way, all right. And the permanent settlement, Raiyatwari settlement, the clue is in the name itself, as I already elucidated. The Raiyatwari settlement has to do with the Raiyats. One reason why you see, the land rights or the revenue payment duties and the land rights were settled with the Raiyat, that is the peasant, all right. Raiyat means peasant. So one reason why the peasantry, revenue payment duties and the settlement rights or property rights were given to peasants themselves is because of the absence of a zamindari class. Zamindari class in these areas were absent, okay, were not to be found, you see, in large numbers, and therefore revenue settlement was made with the peasants themselves. Another person who, you see, championed the settlement of revenues with the peasantry is Lord Monroe, okay, who was previously employed in the revenue board of the southern provinces. However, he later on succeeds Lord Wellesley as the governor of you see, Madras, and therefore he is able to, you see, induct the Raiyatwari settlement in the southern territories, and it happens by 1820s, okay, it happens by 1820s. So this is very important. This is what we will have to remember, that Lord Monroe is intimately associated with the Raiyatwari settlement. And in the Raiyatwari settlement, although the demand was somewhere around 50% of the produce of the peasants, Lord Monroe was able to reduce it down to 1/3, okay. And the pressure was on the Madras government to institute a system which was akin to the zamindari system, that is the permanent settlement system, okay. However, Lord Monroe went ahead with the you see, Raiyatwari form of settlement, and the Raiyatwari form of settlement too, he made some modifications so as the Raiyats have to pay 1/3 and not 50% of their complete produce, okay. It was relatively, you see, it was less oppressive than the zamindari system. However, the revenues that is collected, okay, revenues that is collected is calculated in such a way that the peasantry, even in the southern portions of India, find it a little difficult to pay it, okay. And we also have to understand the fact that these are all mechanisms through which the British rule is perpetuating itself, okay. These are all ways in which the British rule is trying to gain its ascendancy in India, okay. So we see that the Raiyatwari settlement does not just come into effect in the Madras area, but it also comes into effect in the Bombay Presidency, which includes Sindh at that point of time, all right. And proceeding from the Raiyatwari settlement, we go into the Mehelwari settlement now. Now, as far as the Mahalwari settlement, we already understand that it is an estate based system. Okay, it is a system which takes into account you see, not individual peasants, not zamindars, but it includes estates, and these estates are formed out of villages. Okay, villages forms these estates or mahals. All right, and entire villages are grouped into this estate. So, suppose there is one village and it will be deemed as one estate, or two or more villages will be taken as together as one mahal, and it will be deemed an estate from which revenue will be settled you see, collectively. No individual peasant will receive you see property rights individually, and they will not be responsible to pay the revenues you see individually. However, they will be responsible collectively, and the person who is appointed in order to facilitate the collection or the you see distribution of duties for revenue is the lambardar. And this settlement comes into effect in the northwestern portion of India, okay, which also include some areas of Awadh. All right. So, the northwestern portion of India, in this portion of India, the Mahalwari settlement comes into effect. It is the brainchild of Holt Mackenzie. Okay, it is the brainchild of Holt Mackenzie. Let me write it down properly, ZIE. All right. And through this you see, through this settlement, as we already talked about, you see, revenue collection rights or revenue payment you see duties are settled with entire estates, and the lambardars or village headmen, okay, the lambardars are usually village headmen, they are responsible for the payment of revenue. And in case of lapses, if a certain peasant is kicked out of his own tenancy, then the you see, the land is lapsed into the estate. All right, and people take collective possession. Okay, the members of this particular estate will take collective possession of the land that has been vacated. All right, so the estate system is known as the Mahalwari system. As I already talked about, the clue is in the name itself, and we have to remember that the Mahalwari, along with the Mahalwari settlement, there was, you see, a fracture settlement that also took place, that deviates from the Mahalwari settlement, okay, and this comes into effect in the same area where the Mahalwari settlement is taking place. There is a parallel system also, the Mahalwari settlement, which takes into account estates and are governed by, you see, and are governed by the mechanism or the governed by the institution of the lambardar, okay, facilitated through the institution of lambardar. Apart from that, a permanent settlement type system also takes place in this area, okay, and this system is the talukdari system. Now, as far as talukdars are concerned, they were like a zamindari group which are present in the Awadh area, okay, and in certain other areas of the northwestern northwestern provinces of the Britain, okay. The land you see, land rights or property rights were settled in these cases with the talukdars. A class of individuals just like the zamindars who owned large estates, and you see, now they came to own the proprietary rights. Talukdars were given proprietary rights. Talukdars were given proprietary rights, and talukdars were also given the duties to collect revenues, okay. We see that two different systems of land revenue collection and land revenue administration comes into effect in the northwestern provinces, that is the lambardari, the system with the lambardar, that is the Mahalwari settlement, where land revenue is settled in estates, okay, and land revenue is settled in collectivized estates, and the talukdari system, which is akin to the permanent settlement. In fact, it is quite you see quite similar to the permanent settlement. The talukdars own the land and they are responsible for the payments of revenue, all right, and these two systems, they come into effect parallelly, okay, in those places where you see social classes are present who could act as you see proprietary who could act as owners of land, such as the talukdars. The talukdari settlement came into effect. Where such social classes were not present, the estate system was in effect. So these, okay, these are the various land revenue settlements which came into effect with the beginning of the British expansion in India, all right, and these were the mechanisms through which the British collected land revenue from India, all right. So these were the systems through which the British rule perpetuated itself, and these were the system through which the British rule gained their economic supremacy over the other smaller kingdoms in India, okay, and they were able to, with the finances of these with the finances that came to the British government with the institution of these settlements, the British were able to finance their various wars and their various policies, and they were able to come victorious in the struggle for ascendancy over India, all right. So with that, I hope that the settlement systems of the British is quite clear to you. I hope you will be studying hard. Thank you.